It's late August 2003, and there are a couple of significant events going on this week in the world. One of them is fairly important. It's the closest connection with the planet Mars in almost 60,000 years. And the other one I think is of equal importance, and that is an interview in the town of Schuyler Falls in the Morrisonville Town Hall with my friend Marv Connor, the historian. How are you, Marv?
Pretty well, thank you.
Great to be here. You and I have talked about this for some time. Soon after you got the job here, you came down to my office and we talked, and you spent a lot of time talking with our dear friend Addie Shields, the Clinton County historian. She's enough to get you worked up on the subject of history.
Addie's a sweetheart.
She is wonderful. Well, it's a delight to have you seated in this chair, working in this office, in this little corner of an office in the town of Schuyler Falls. And we used to spend a lot of time with our mutual friend Leo Perry when he was the historian here, and we had an awful lot of fun. How does one get to be a historian? You had a whole life before becoming the historian in Schuyler Falls.
I backed into this job. I was doing genealogical research from my own family.
Yeah.
And then I went looking from Franklin County, where my relatives were, over to Clinton County. Couldn't find anything. And it was basically I wanted to be able to put the cemeteries or get a hold of cemetery information. So I came down here and they had the McClellan books. Can I take them? Borrow them? Just to put them together? No, you got to be a historian in order to grab those. I don't want to be the historian. How about we make you the assistant historian or acting, whatever. So I borrowed the books. I did the 10 cemeteries. They're up on the internet on the Clinton County General webpage.
Yes, they are.
And then Donna Hamill, the town clerk, says, Addie Shields wants to talk to you.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
So I ended up, and I went down and saw Addie, and I got the spiel, and I kept saying no, no. And Addie doesn't recognize that word.
No, not at all. She just talks right through, no.
And one of the things she hit me on was the cemetery down here, the old Schuyler Falls Cemetery, because she'd gotten letters from the Hilliard family and whatever. Well, anyway, I succumbed. I took the job. And it was one that I had my arms around, but now it's gotten too big, really, for one person with all that we want to do. And so we need help.
Well, you know, it's a tough job. And in many times in the past, the role of historian in these small towns has been almost like a backseat to other important posts in the towns and the counties. And it's a shame, because I think we're at a point in North Country history where people are really starting to pay attention. And a lot of that has to do with the aggressiveness of people like you in the office who decided they want to preserve some of this history. But before we go there, I want to know what you did in your previous life.
In a previous life, born in Tupper Lake, raised in Tupper Lake, went to study for the priesthood for 3 years. That was not my vocation. Married a beautiful young lady from Saranac Lake after a year, and we raised a family of 8 children. And we lived most of our married life down in Maryland. I worked for the National Security Agency doing research, which was the background, and have always been a World War II buff, so I was interested in history. We settled up here because to help my mom and dad, who live out on the Irish settlement in the summer, in the old family homestead, which has been around in our family since about 1900. So we just got interested.
Like I said, we're recording this program in late August 2003, and you've been in this office for how long now, Mark?
Just about 2 years now, 2 years.
It takes a long time. Like you said, you thought you had your arms around it, and then because all these towns have such rich history, your arms don't become long enough after a while.
No, one of the big problems I had was when I took the job, we had a number of books and things, but a lot of the pictures were missing, and nobody knew where they were. So I've had to reaccumulate, so to speak.
Well,
And-
that's an ongoing process.
But I was following a ghost,
Oh yeah.
Leo Perry.
Oh yeah, and what a guy! And we still communicate with him often. And a few weeks ago, in real time, Leo and Teresa were here. We met him in church for just a few minutes. Speaking of ghosts, he loves ghost stories as I do, and he's told me a few stories up here. We got together very well. We're going to talk about Leo. We're going to talk about North Country history, especially that of Morrisonville, Schuyler Falls, Norrisville, who knows what else, as we continue with our little corner. Every town, every community takes a certain amount of pride in its history. But some towns just kind of let that go by, and they don't have a good, energetic, passionate historian like you. And it's such a shame. Calvin and I have spent a lot of time visiting these little communities as they celebrate their centennials and their bicentennials and their tercentennials and their sesquicentennials, and we enjoy the parades. We just recently did a show down in Moira, where I went to high school, and they've turned a beautiful little old town building, a civic center, into a really neat museum. And we love to spotlight people like that. And we've had a lot of fun here in Schuyler Falls. We did a parade one time, right? 150th anniversary right out front, and I did a walking tour. Somebody had written me a script. I didn't really know who was in the houses. For all I know, Leo wrote the script for me.
Probably.
And so it's fun for you to come from the outside in and try to play catch up, huh?
Well, it's fun, but there's a dynamic
Oh yeah,
that goes with being an outsider.
Yeah.
Because they look at you, why are you asking these questions? I've only been in the town since '92.
Yeah.
And even though the family's been around for 100 years. But it's refreshing in that you see it completely different. You don't see it as just, oh, that's part of the fabric, and then we just go on with our lives. You see it as a situation. Like I mentioned when we were discussing earlier, walking up to the Morrisonville Elementary School and seeing 40th anniversary. All of a sudden, there's a history story there, and especially with that school, it's just super. So those kinds of things, while everybody takes that school for granted, I see it as a jewel in a historical setting. And if I ever get to all the material Mr. Ott gave me, we'll have a fairly decent story.
Speaking of Brad Ott, who of course, as I refreshed his memory, Brad Ott was the goalie and I think the very first club hockey team that Plattsburgh State had, right, Calvin? Way back when, did some color for us on the local radio station, became a principal, has made a real impact on the community by teaching his kids what it's like to be good neighbors during the ice storm and during the 2 floods that we had one year, and getting the kids involved and helping their communities. And the Red Cross and Jeannie Roberts was involved, and those are very, very important things. So the little schools are so important, and we like to give credit to the people who impact our lives, and a guy like Brad Ott and maybe some of your old teachers, and I know many of my old teachers and Calvin's teachers had sometimes as much impact on our lives as our parents did.
Oh yeah, the personal side of it more than anything, because, well, used to be watched a lot more because you didn't have television, so
True.
People were looking outside their doors and windows more often.
Yeah.
No, I really enjoyed this. I get frustrated sometimes, and I told Leo I was chasing him as a ghost when I went to places because trying to find the pictures. And you'd find one that would say, well, gee, Leo already took that.
Yeah, like.
Well, having met him that same weekend that you saw him in church,
Yes.
that was an instant bond. He's just a super guy. He has sent me tapes now, some of recordings. And
Audio
stuff.
tapes,
Audio.
neat stuff
Yep.
of the Methodist church
You got
bell ringing in Schuyler Falls.
So he's gonna send some pictures to go with that of the bell and all, and we're gonna kind of put that into a package and have it as a kind of a showpiece. He's also got slides he's sending, so that's really great.
And Leo had a number, I don't know, maybe 3 or more complete slideshows. And
It's
he
about
just,
500, I think. He
oh
said.
my goodness. And so it was a real treat to be there and listen to him not read a prepared speech, but speak from his own personal memory and from things people had told him. And that's good. So you're going to end up with a wealth of information, but right now you're in the collection process.
Collection, need help. I need help with formulating and putting things together and stuff like that. I've already started. I've got pretty much of the base of our history in outline in that red book, which is...
All right, let's stand up. Maybe we can take a look at it.
We've got about, as you can see, it looks like that now.
Ooh, you got a good start.
Oh, yeah.
What kinds of things do you have in there?
Well, we got the pulp and paper industry, the churches. I've got all the cemeteries we put up. They're all in here. And we're into the pictures. A lot of those that Ron Ben gave us.
Oh, yes.
That the then and now of the pulp mills and stuff. And what we're doing is trying to take these and all the pictures as we get them, pull them together, and we're going to put them into these volumes. Okay. Now,
Empty books right now.
this will fill this with all the
Oh,
pictures.
I'm sure it will.
And we've done it in outline form so that it's almost like a Dewey Decimal System where we can track.
Oh, yes.
And the pictures will be numbered the same way with another inscription.
Terrific.
So it'll just pull together. And you can add, subtract. I'd like to do it in workbook form. We need to get somebody to publish it, and I think I'm going to have to probably go north of the border because it's a little cheaper up there. But to be able to get a subscription going and to be able to upgrade and maybe once or twice a year update it and what have you. A lot of work, and the pictures, we are printing them right here. The town, and I said, don't give me that salary because I'm going to be asking you to pay for a lot of things. So they've bought me a printer, copier, scanner, computer, and we have a digital camera, so when we go out and take pictures, we can
that's
just
wonderful.
download them, and it's helped a lot. I just can't express my thanks to the town board for all of their support. It's
Well,
just
you
been
could
great.
use a group of volunteers. I mean, what if people are watching this show and say, hey, that sounds like something I'd like to spend a little time at? How would they get a hold of you, Marv?
We're at the town hall Monday through Thursday. We're a little later on Wednesday, about an hour later, from 9 to 12 or 10 to 1 on Wednesday. We're not open on Friday. 563-1129.
There.
Stop down. We're down
It's
at
on Mason Street,
Mason Street,
in
yeah.
Morrisonville. Not
Yep.
too hard to find.
No, right next to the playground, and most of the young folks know where that is. So, but we're just, I do need some hands and some help, and
It's daunting. It's daunting when you have hundreds of years of history to try to pull together. And although I would never detract anything from those people who've done historical things for the town of Schuyler Falls or any other town, everybody has a different idea of how to preserve history. And when you come in, it's difficult to pull it together in the way that you think it ought to
yeah,
be.
right, because you're rethinking everything, right?
sure.
Now Leo's probably got the base for most of what I'm going to do. In addition, I use the old anniversary booklet, the blue
Oh,
booklet.
sure, yes.
I use that as the basis for pulling this together, and we've just modified a few things and all, and we've upgraded some of the verbiage.
But that weekend that we were here, there were pictures everywhere on all the walls. And now
No.
they're not.
They're not. There are pictures on the walls, but not like there were.
Not like
no.
there were that day. People came out of the woodwork and donated pictures from their attics.
Yep.
And
That's the next thing I want to do, is to take some of the then pictures, the then and nows, and get them put up into on mats and stuff, and start putting them out into the hallway again. Hopefully, down the road, we're going to have our own place, because this is not any place to store things.
well,
As you
you just have to keep putting the pressure on.
Yeah.
We're thinking of in Moores, where they have built a beautiful new facility there.
I'm so jealous of Carol.
And Carol, but don't you think she fought for that little
Oh,
corner?
yeah. Oh, I know she did.
We
but
call
that's
this show our little corner, and she
Yeah.
calls that room her little corner,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's fought for more space, and I think she overpowered them with her personality, and
My-
they finally said, okay, go ahead, and
My
she's
wife
got a
and I
beautiful place.
went up there and visited her, and
Isn't she a
I
neat
almost
lady?
cried. Yeah, she's super. I almost cried when I
But
went
that
in there.
didn't just happen. She
No,
didn't
no.
just say, give me the money and
That's
I'll build
14
it.
years of work.
It's an awful lot of work,
Yep,
but that's
right.
what can happen
Yep, right.
if you're strong enough and stick around for another.
Well, I'm putting together a design on a room. I have to do it at home because this is all admin and paperwork here. So, but I'd like to have something that size, which is it doesn't look that big, but it's 16 by 16 up there. So
Yeah.
it's a good size. But she put it together nicely.
But you know, people who are watching this program from the town of Schuyler Falls, Morrisonville, or any other town who might have a connection with its history here would do well to call Marv Connor here at the office or stop in anytime and say, yeah, I got something that I would like to have preserved as part of the history, because every story counts, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, it does. And you can donate it, and we'll give it back. We'll just loan it to us for a few days. We'll copy it into the computer. Everything is going on the computer because
great
we're not
idea.
going to go through recompiling this again. If you want to do it on permanent loan, we have a form. You opt out, you sign it, we sign it, gets notarized, so there's no doubt on how it's going to be handled or taken care of. And attribution will be given to the people, not to me. My name will be in a thank you note somewhere, because I do not want attribution for what's going on. This is the town, and the people are the history, and that's what I need to know.
The people are certainly the history. I've got to, before we go much farther, I got to talk about the Schuyler Falls Cemetery. You said every town, there are cemeteries in every town. Most of them have been cataloged a few times. In Schuyler Falls, how many?
10 that I am
10
aware of.
cemeteries
Yes.
that you know of. Some are private cemeteries. How many public?
3 of them were public, yeah. Well, they're public. The Irish cemetery is a closed cemetery. It's being taken care of by St. John's. And that's pretty well taken care of. The new Schuyler Falls Cemetery is public. That's open now for burials. And the old Schuyler Falls Cemetery, which is the one we're working on, is owned by the town, okay? So if you own it, you're responsible for it. If you don't own it, it's moral or conscience that makes you want to take care of it. But right now, we own this one, and that's the one we're taking care of.
The public is, I hope, aware of the project that's ongoing as we speak in the old Schuyler Falls Cemetery.
We did this.
There was a nice story in the paper. That was
Jolo Templio, that was
way back on July 19th.
19th. Right.
And I'm aware of it because our community service crew from the probation department where I work with Frank Agnew
Yes.
has just gone in there and used their muscle and brawn, and the town has helped out, and a lot of people have helped out because, I would have to say almost 40 years ago, and Kay and I are fascinated by cemeteries. Anybody that likes history walks around cemeteries and takes a look at gravestones, and it's not a macabre interest. It's, there's a name.
Yeah.
That represented a person
Real
and a
person.
family and a time and a place. And we found that old cemetery up there in Schuyler Falls. And as we looked around, and we said, what a shame. And didn't think much about it again until I heard that you guys were grubbing up there. And how did this whole thing come to light again?
Well, it was given to the town of Plattsburgh in 1846. Actually, it was sold, but basically given it was an acre of property. We got it in 1848 when we became a town, just by the fact that it was with us. We own it. Nothing has been done much up there for 150 some years. The Hilliard family, who originally gave it, some of the descendants came up to visit to look at the cemetery and were totally dismayed, discouraged, and everything else. They wrote a letter to Addie. So that's going back to our earlier conversations. That was part of her charge to me. Take care of that cemetery. It's disgraceful.
Boy.
And she was right. There were big ruts up through there where they've gone up there with recreational vehicles and everything.
Gravestones thrown over the bank. Just
Broken.
horrible desecration. This is
George Seymour and I.
Take a look at this photograph, and I'll hold it up so Calvin can lock on it. Talk about this.
Well, George Seymour and I were up 2 to 3 days ago, and these 5 pieces were just sitting. Frank Agnew's people had brought them up onto the
Yeah.
up. They were over the bank. They brought them up and just set them by this tree, and we put them together. And this is symptomatic of some of the stuff that's gone on up there. What we're doing is we're not letting any more of that happen. Now, we can never fully recover that cemetery, but we did put a historical marker up here 2 days ago.
Oh, I heard you did.
And,
That's wonderful. First of all, let's tell people where that cemetery is.
It's right as you go down 22B to the Rock store or at the Norrisville intersection. Take a right behind Rock's store is a duplex, which used to be an old 2-room schoolhouse, by the way.
Yep.
And right beyond that is where the cemetery is, and it runs for quite a ways. There's an acre right there. And
For a long time, people who drove by there had no idea that was a cemetery.
no,
back then.
no.
It was just so overgrown. I want people to know that
I went there the first time looking for it, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And but we will be putting a monument in there because we can't recover all of the stones. We're using the McClellan tombstone inscription collection, and we have 2 Revolutionary War vets were buried in there, and one 1812. Now,
significant all by
oh
itself.
yeah, oh yes, and that's part of it. And but just people deserve better. That was a crying day for me because that was so bad. Yeah.
Already hundreds of hours have gone into it, and there'll be more. And there was a small fence there, right? Around part of it.
No, it was on the inside corner on the northeast side. Just maybe 2 or 3 posts and stuff,
I
but nothing
that.
to protect anything.
Yeah.
And there is a little pipe fence around one certain plot.
Okay, I
But the
remember
rest
that.
of it is
Yeah.
just gone.
But it's nice that you do have a listing of all those buried there. As a matter of fact, that's on the county website right now.
Yes, it is. Yep.
So that people can view that. It's quite a resource. There are a lot of great internet resources, and our county's trying to build up
Right.
all the links that it has to things. We should also mention that the cemetery is in a community that was once called Norrisville. That was a thriving community, but there are 80-some ghost towns in Clinton County, as I
know.
learned from Connie Pope when I first came up here. And it's fun to discover the origin of that. And quite a few people have done some histories. I know Shirley Balco was into that
Oh,
at
yes.
one time.
Well, Shirley is the one person I've talked to with the old historical society. She's about the one person that's left. And I told Shirley, we got to revive that historical association because I need some help. And you guys did some nice research on small items and stuff like that, which is just the anecdotal kinds of things that we need. And she said, oh, after the elections, we'll get after it. But like most small towns, politics first, but we'll get there. I've gotten discouraged, and I almost walked out one time because it just seemed like you're beating your head. But the effort of George Seymour, who started the cleanup, a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And then George and I were up walking the other night, and George said, this is a little bit bigger than we thought it was going to be when we started, because we didn't realize we had a full acre up there. And even when you looked at the at the deed, and it's got the footage and everything. It just didn't register. And we'll be about 60% done. But on the 23rd of this month, September, 2 in the afternoon, we're going to have a dedication ceremony. We are sending out invitations to the political folks so we can get them down, and the folks who are involved with it. And we're also going to put an item of interest into the newspaper, inviting the public. But the only thing we have to know is, if you're going to go, let us know so we can have enough cake and stuff afterwards for everybody.
If I go, you won't have to worry about it. I can't eat cake. I ate enough cake to last anybody for 22 lifetimes.
But really, that's. I have done most of the headwork, and I'm overwhelmed. So I know how much I just want everyone to know how much I appreciate what the crews from the probation and George Seymour. George has been just a great guy.
There's so many talented individuals in this town, as we do in every other town, and if we can get people to exercise that talent and to help out in volunteer ways. Calvin and I just spend a couple of the most delicious hours of our lifetimes on Crab Island.
Oh, yes.
Where our friend John Rock from the town of Schuyler Falls,
our neighbor up the road here, yes,
got his crew together from NYSEG and the Plattsburgh Municipal Lighting Department and other experts. And believe me, there were, I don't know, several hundred years worth of experience here. And we were the only media there. I guess the fates were with us that day, but we took a flying trip with Roger Howard out to the island and watched them erect that thing by hand with cables into the trees. And you know, a guy like John Rock, who just decided to carry this cross, said, I want that thing up. I want these boys, these men that died on both sides to be honored.
Right.
And you know, he took that by God attitude, and with a little bit of disappointment along the way and stories that we're all familiar with, they got it up there. So it's a real kick for Calvin and I to be part of this history and to salute a guy like John Rock and all of his friends who helped him in that project. But we have lots of people in this town. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this program today, to renew that interest in history, not just genealogy, but in the history of the area, and ours is rich in it. You have a slideshow that's really nice. We're going to take a look at that.
Okay.
I sicked them on Ron Venn, our good friend Ron Venn. We've done over a dozen programs with Ron, the before and after pictures. And you put some of those up, made a nice little slideshow along with some other things. And it's growing all the time.
Every picture I have is in that slideshow.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, so
we're going to take a look at those. We're going to talk an awful lot more about the history of the town of Schuyler Falls, and who knows what else we'll get into before we finish our interview today with Marv Connor. It's interesting how this history is recovered and how it unfolds for those of us who aren't really initiated. As our viewers know, our good friend Ron Venn over on Bailey Avenue has supplied us with countless hours of wonderful education and information, not only because he's a master craftsman, creates wonderful models and scenarios of battle scenes that come right out of his head, but also in 1995, I believe, he got on a kick of looking at old photographs, but wasn't satisfied. So he would make every effort that he could in engaging historians and going to the library and talking with folks in bookstores and try to find out where the photographer stood when he or she took that photograph all those years ago. And he'll stand there and take another photograph, and we called it Then and Now, but before we started with this segment of our program today, Calvin says it's almost a misnomer to call it now, because even by the time this program is aired, it would have been another then. But in any case, the pictures are then, and the now references every day that he took that picture from 1995 to the present time at 2003, and I'm sure that process will continue, because I don't know how many books he has of those full. Now he had at least 3 or 4, didn't he, Calvin, of those books full of those pictures. Well, as good as his resources are, sometimes they're not flawless, because you and I might ask somebody about a building and their recollection. People's recollections of places and events are sometimes different one from the other because of perspective. Take a look at this picture on the screen right now. That's a picture of two buildings. One picture that was taken 100 years ago or more, and the other one that was taken fairly recently. Now, on a cursory glance, you would think they're the same building. And Ron thought they were. That old building, which was called the William H. Myers Block in Morrisonville, and the former Sugar Creek store that was once Clyde Rabideau Jr.'s checkout convenience store, that was once a general merchandise store that belonged to Fred Pierce, and it's been many things down through the years, including a funeral home from time to time. However, as I discovered from information that Leo Perry told me, they're not one and the same building. And here's how I came upon that information. Here's a blow-up of the original postcard. And you can see it says William H. Myers Block, so-and-so. We don't have a date on it, but it's a larger version of a postcard. And Annis Lamora, who lives almost across the road from my house, and Sonny Lamora, really wanted this picture of this building to have been the exact property where their house was built. And I said, well, the first guy I'm going to contact who will know the story
Leo Perry
is our friend Leo Perry. So I just sent him a little email. I'm not good at scanning images, so I gave him my best description. And he didn't say, I think I know, maybe I know. He said, of course I know. And I want to read part of the letter that he sent me because it's delicious. Marv and I both love this because these are the anecdotes that make history come alive, aren't they?
I'm going to take part of it and put it into a little blurb.
I just absolutely love it. Of course, he said he was glad to hear from us, yada, yada, yada. You've just opened my favorite subject, local history. I have the same postcard that Annis has, and I'll explain what I know about the Myers Block. Mr. William Myers was Merle Myers' father. In other words, he was Roland Dagenaw's wife Carolyn's grandfather. Teresa, that's his wife, remembers that building burned around 1937. Little perspective, that was the year I was born. Now he tells me exactly where the building was located. Just west of where John and Carol Sorrell live, and they live just down the street from me. I believe that when we left Morrisonville, there was a family by the name of Campagna that lived there, and yes, Don Campagna and his wife still live there. If you look at the postcard, you'll see between the two men at the left what appears to be a wooden washing machine. I would never in the world have seen that it was a wooden washing machine between those two guys, but he did. Then he says at the far right, about 5 feet above the floor, a small sign that if you use a magnifying glass will read, Post Office. I didn't see that either. Also, he says, in the upper right window will be seen a lady looking out. I didn't see that either. At the right is the carriage house and horse barn. The area of the horse barn and carriage house is where John and Carol Sorrell's house now stands. The postmaster, this is a lot of information. The postmaster was Mr. Leander Wood at the time of the photo. Mr. Wood retired in 1914. The post office was relocated to the large apartment building at the east end of the Green Bridge. That's a huge building that was the post office when I moved into this area way back when. It's been a number of things. There was a barber shop there. There was a general merchandise store there. Well, in any case, at that time, the apartment building was the Avery and Light General Store. They also sold Model T cars. Mr. Amos Avery sold his interest in the business to Mr. Bill Light, who was the postmaster for the next 50 years. Mr. Avery then went to Peru to become the manager of Northern Orchards. Now that ties that whole story together very nicely. He says, now back to the Myers Block. Mr. Myers didn't rebuild after the fire. However, just across the street from the Myers Block was the Riley and Ruger store, which was a cement block building located where Pete and Betty Daniels built the Brown House, which I believe is now an antique store. Riley and Ruger store burned about 1939. They then built the building that now stands. I believe that the covered stairway on the west end of the building and the postcard was rebuilt and is still there. This has big significance for me. Henry Riley and Frank Ruger were brothers-in-law. Their store that burned was where the basketball games were played. They played basketball upstairs, and Leo remembers playing basketball there many times, and where the village suppers and plays were held. And he has a million wonderful baked bean stories, and I don't know what all about that place. He goes on to say, Mr. Ruger was the owner of the property where you now live. Ta-da! The big building that is now a video store before me was one of the beautiful homes in the area. He says, I recall Mr. Ruger, I love this part, I recall Mr. Ruger coming down Emery Street, and as he came to the corner at Main Street, he'd blow his horn on his Buick Coupe, which was perhaps a 28 or 29 car, and proceed without stopping, without really stopping. Of course, it was fortunate there weren't many cars going around here at that time. He says the village band used to practice on the front porch of the last Riley and Ruger store, and there were ongoing checker games around the potbelly stove. Doesn't that sound familiar? The Moira, that Moira town hall / museum had a potbelly stove and a checker game. And I made believe I was playing with one of the guys, and he beat me soundly, even though it was make-believe. Okay, he says, one story that I heard many times was when Mr. Herb Sorrell, who had the large house and barber shop where Annis and Ed Lamora now live, sent a young boy to buy a 5-cent cigar at the Riley and Ruger store. Mr. Sorrell gave the boy a $5 bill, big money back in those days. Mr. Riley gave the boy a bag of 495 pennies to give to Mr. Sorrell. I mean, these were practical jokers. Mr. Sorrell, who had a temper which was perhaps sharper than the point of a pin, grabbed a straight razor and went up the street and into the store where Mr. Riley was putting up a grocery order for a lady. When Mr. Sorrell went into the store and shouted that he was going to cut Riley's throat, the lady got scared and ran out of the store. Because of his temper, Mr. Sorrell was always having some sort of trick played on him. I love it, because I know his descendants very well and had dinner with a couple of them the other night. He was delighted. I mean, he didn't say, Gordy, let me do some research.
No.
Give me 5 minutes, 3 days, 2 weeks. And all of a sudden I had this email which not only told me where the building was, but was delicious.
Oh, I met him for probably 45 minutes. And it was just such a nice bonding, and he just started talking and talking and talking.
Oh, he's so good at
it. I've just since had a email from him, and he said, I know I got this harmonica thing going, but I'm starting on the slides. And he's got, I think, between 450 and 500, and he's got them marked. And he's now starting to do a narrative to go with them, and he's going to send them up.
It's
so
wonderful. When you say harmonica thing, I should point out that Leo Perry has a senior citizens harmonica band in Florida. They do shows, I don't know how many a year. They had one guy that was almost 100 years old still playing the harmonica with him, and it's just a great thing to do. He and Teresa both love life, and he still has this tremendous passion for history.
Oh. Yeah.
It's great.
I was more than impressed with it, and he just he was bubbling over with it. He has so much knowledge and having grown up here, which is the big advantage.
And here.
Yeah, big advantage over me. And I could never come to, so he said he's going to send me some things that I could write, and I said, no, Leo, you have to write them because you lived them. And he said, "Okay, I understand that." And but he and I kind of hit it off, and I'm so happy for that.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about your slideshow, and this is really quite nice.
Well, what I've done, a number of things have been given to us that have that people wanted back. So in order, if it was paper or books, one of them was a textbook for the old school district number 2, which was
no kidding.
And Tommy Connors lent that to me, and he said, "I'd like to have this back." I said, "I don't have a problem." Is that the
one up by across from Ronnie's?
No, this was the one that is right up behind where the little corner store is on the Turnpike and Irish Settlement Road.
I got you.
Up on the hill.
That
and
is number 2.
in fact, Clyde Rabideau Jr. tore that one down. And I went over and saw him, and I said, "You don't have a picture of that, do you?" He said, "No, I didn't take a picture." So that's one of the ones we're trying to find a picture for. There, we have a number. I think there were 10, and we have, I think, 5 or 6 now that we have some location on. So we're trying to find the other 4.
These are pictures of the cemetery that.
Oh, yeah, these are some of the barrier, but they're all intermingled, so they don't
That's
all
okay.
come in sequence.
I enjoy them as they
But,
go by because I recognize. We have to let some of our viewers who may not be aware of it that there were maneuvers up around Norrisville all the way up to the Macomb Park area.
1939, yeah.
In the area, and I have some of the original photographs, I think, of some of the maneuvers that were done even many years before that in this area.
Ron Venn sent me a booklet he got from the library at SUNY, and it has the whole thing laid out, so I'm just going to pick it up and throw it in with the narrative, because we've got tons of other photos now with that.
This is the old
Catholic Church. Yeah.
The rectory is
I just took the now picture of the rectory, which is being torn down.
being torn down, so that's
Yep.
a piece of history.
Yep.
Troops marching on Main
That's
Street
the-
and Mason Street.
Yep.
Right at the intersection there, you can see where Mason bears off to the right, where Calvin had to come down here.
This is the old grist mill.
There were so many mills, including grist mills and God knows what, along the rivers in our town. We have historical markers up by what I used to call the beach. We have some beautiful big stones with a couple of nice markers and a good plaque on the stones. And I love to see things like that. I was so pleased when those got
Oh yeah, they came out of the old mills, and that area, this whole area was full of mills. The pulp mills were the big item, and we have a lot of those when they were being constructed and all of that. So we have a good photographic series going through that. The one area that I really want to get back and do some more research on is the old mill complex in Schuyler Falls. Schuyler Falls was bigger than Morrisonville at one time, and right now it's well, you can spit across the street and never hit anything, still today. But there was a cooperage there, and I just learned of that. And there's a lady who came to me one day and asked me if I had any information on a place up on the Norrisville Road into town that was called the Dairy. And it's an old farm, and she said they called it the Dairy. And I said, well, I'll see if I can find out. Now, I was talking to our supervisor, Harold Ormsby. I said, Harold, you know any old-timers that might know that? He says, well, there's a couple, but we're getting to be the old-timers.
Yeah, that's true,
because
too.
we don't talk to the old folks as much as we should, and they have that history we're looking for. So if you ever get a chance to talk, if any of the people watching get a chance to talk to their grandparents, especially young kids, do it, because when the grandparents and the great-grandparents go, it's over.
We're big fans of audio and visual history. We've taken pleasure in interviewing a number of people who are 100 years old and older, and we find those stories, those anecdotal stories, really bring the history to life.
Yeah, and there's things that they want to tell. Yeah, they're reluctant at first because they're not used to being recorded and filmed and stuff like that. But once they start opening up, my goodness, the stuff that rolls off, they're just beautiful.
We've had people say, "Shut that thing off! I want to tell you a real story about what that was like."
Right. Leo told me about one of those.
Just because they're 100 years old doesn't mean they have vivid memories of a lot of things that happened. And part of the great North Country history, two things that come to mind. One is the Underground Railroad, and another one is Prohibition. Two very interesting times in American history. And talk about this North Country. It's enmeshed with both of those themes,
Right. Sadly, I was called about a month ago. You've got to do something about this house raising they're going to have right up here on the hill. that was hooked up with the Underground Railroad. Well, I said, I can't do anything. Well, he said, it's historical. And I said, well, be that as it may, I have no responsibility, nor does the town. If it were on the historical register, now that's a different story. But the town doesn't put things on the historical register. The individuals put them on. And I related that story. Now they've since raised the house. That's the one they had the big fire with up there. And they took her right down to the ground because there's going to be a development going in there. Well, sadly, we have not been able to recoup any of that information. I told that story to Janine Broadwell, who was here visiting, who owns the Broadwell house, and suggested that if she wanted to get it on the historical register, because it is a historical house as far as this town and in this county.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And she was very interested and is going to look into that. And the Broadwell Cemetery, by the way,
It's right
still
there.
has burials today.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, private for the family.
And there's a nice, very nice historical marker
Oh,
right
yeah.
there. And that house is not nearly the oldest house in the town, but it's as stalwart as any house you'll ever see. If you've ever been inside that house or down in the basement and see how thick the stone walls are.
Well, that was their insulation back then.
My goodness, it's amazing. And it's a wonderful house that was probably built in the 1840s. I like to walk. I like to walk around our town. It's a great way to view things. It's so much better than driving. And I like the old Morrison house on top of the hill, which is maybe the oldest house existing in our town that dates to, 1805.
Right, and I don't know why it's maybe, but whatever that caused that to be put on the sign, I'll just accept it for what it is. That's an old one. That's wooden structure though, and much tougher to keep alive, and but still being used. Hopefully,
Yeah, almost 200 years old. That's amazing.
You mentioned the historical markers. That's one of the things I want to do is to get them cataloged and have a section in this so we can keep them all with a picture and a description and maybe show some on the roadway where they are and what have you. I've taken these down here at the riverside, and I've been transferring them into my so I can get my thing done, but it takes time, but a little bit at a time. But one of my goals is to get maybe a driving tour for children so they can go, for school to go through or to the historical markers and just get a little bit.
That's a great idea.
Or even use it as a show and tell. Maybe go to the schools, I don't know, but it's something that the kids can get into. It's something we don't teach very well anymore is history. And as in genealogy, you either find people who like it or they don't like it. There's gray areas doesn't belong in either history or genealogy. I found that in my own family with 8 children.
You can foster it and you can nurture it. And I loved it when teachers would send my kids and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren home with an assignment. Ask your grandmother what life was like where you live when she was a little girl,
Right.
or your grandfather. And I've written so many of those things for my kids in school. I should have saved them all because they were interesting and fun.
Well, I have grandkids now who are playing these games on television.
Oh,
I
sure.
tell them, we didn't have television when I was growing up, and we only listened to the radio when Dad turned it on. Can't understand that. No comprehension at all. They can't imagine life without television. We had to make our own games, and I think we used our imagination a little bit more.
That's one of my favorite words, and I love to give lectures to kids about imagination. That's why I talk about reading and talk about parents shutting the television off, not because I have anything against the medium. People are watching our program on television right now, but because people have to react. They have to interact with each other. Kids have to go out and take a walk in the woods and see what the birds, the flora, and the fauna are. Build a treehouse, for goodness sake. Manufacture your own toys. Make up the rules for whatever game, like Wannacat and Kick the Can and Post Office and Spin the Bottle.
Boy, if we ever got a hold of a little wheel And we would take 2 sticks and make a little, run it down a wide slat and let the wheel down and just go run down the sidewalk.
Isn't it amazing?
And that was, well, you could spend a whole afternoon doing that.
Well, we could talk about the old days, and I've done a few columns that I call as old as dirt. And you're
Yeah.
old as dirt when you may have seen those on your internet, but I think I was in the radio business for a long time, and when I think there are many people watching this program who've never seen a phonograph record.
Oh, my goodness.
You talk about 78s and their eyes glaze over.
Right.
Talk about 45s, about LPs, and then I know old timers who see a CD and they say, Gordy, have you ever heard this little record?
That's good.
So it's amazing, the things that we've done and seen in our lifetimes, and it is good that we share that with our. What happened to our slideshow? All of a sudden, can we get that going again? Just a couple of
It goes
pictures.
to sleep after a while.
it does?
It's a smart machine.
Oh, my.
Environmentally safe.
Uh,
This is going to have to go now until
Oh,
it
yeah, that's
goes
okay.
to sleep. So, no, the one thing I enjoy every summer is I have some of my grandchildren come with me for a week or so, and we work out in the woods.
That's great.
Teach them how to shovel dirt onto how to use a shovel. That what I call the tools of ignorance. And well, we love to do this. I said, you do now, because you're with Grandpa, but not when you get older. Okay, get an education, because that's where it is.
You appreciate the people who taught you things. My mother was what was his name? Yule Gibbons, who has a son that lives in the northern tier, right, Calvin? And my mother could have been Mrs. Yule Gibbons, because when we were little kids, we went on those nature walks. She told you what mushrooms were good to eat, and where the best wild leeks were, and Swiss chard, and how it grew in the garden, and what things you could eat, how you could make a salad out of dandelion greens, and I've not forgotten a lot of those.
Well, the only thing I have memories of gardens are victory gardens during the
That
war.
too.
Boy, that's why I'm not a farmer today. That was a lot of work as a kid.
Well, everybody has memories. I can remember going down the ditches picking up milkweed pods. For some reason, we filled gunny sacks, as we called them, burlap sacks with milkweed pods. It's something to do with the war effort. I have no idea at this moment what they did, but I'm sure there are people who are viewing who do.
Oh
But
gosh.
those were wonderful days.
Yeah, that was a whole different way of living. I mean, you conserve then as a matter of survival for and today we talk about recycling. Oh gosh, and people moan and groan, and they still throw it off on the sides of the roads. So.
Well, that's something else that's part of the history of the town of Schuyler Falls, and that's the landfills. And it's interesting to me. You can discuss it on any level you want to. But when I first moved up here in 1961, and as I walk around the town, I think, now, where was the dump? And every time I'll pass a driveway and I say, that's where I went to empty my garbage, or up in West Plattsburgh, that's where I paid my taxes. And I look at all these places that were places that aren't being used for that anymore.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm looking for old pictures. Give me old pictures. I'll just lend them to me.
Yeah.
Send me an anecdote. Lend it to me. I'll give it back to you. And my mother gave me this gristmill news yesterday. I had never seen one.
Oh, the gristmill news. I've got to let's get a picture of that. I want to at least show it on here because it mentions.
Simple, straightforward, and just.
It's called the
nice.
Gristmill News, and it's dated back. It looks
Oh,
like it was dated back longer than that, but
No, it's 91. It's been
1991.
But
And it talks about Leo Perry and his number, and Shirley Balco, the secretary.
yeah, and that's the first one I've ever seen. Bonnie Yop, who was the one who was writing those and did the research on them.
Yeah.
She has all of them, and she's once she gets to the right box, she's going to make me a copy of all of them. She also has the postcards, of the town, which I did not have here, and she's going to give me those as well. So we're going to pretty much bring all of that back. This actually was the second year, and it was the 8th item they'd put out.
Item, and she's talking about Norrisville and what a thriving community it was, and she goes on to say they were in an area of the brook on Shingle Street several hundred feet before it intersects with the Norrisville Road. East of the road, there are the remnants of a mill on the brook.
Yep.
2 partial walls standing, one on each side of the brook. One wall is 35 feet long and 8 feet high. The type and use of this structure is unknown. I wonder if those walls are still up there.
I have not been up there, and I will. And there was a cooperage up there,
Yes.
so that may have been the cooperage. I don't know.
And there were lots of we talk about schools, and the old Morrisonville High School, there are pictures somewhere later. That sideshow seems to be locked on that one.
I can get you those.
But the old school is roughly where the church is now, and the old church was behind it.
The old church was up on the knoll, and the rectory sits up there.
Yeah.
And the church was right beside the rectory, and I can show you that. Church
And that era is passing as we speak, because the rectory is,
I got the picture.
there's the church. I don't know if Calvin can see over your shoulder.
Well, I'm going to move out of here.
Okay.
I've got to come down here a ways. This is the way the old church sat.
There's
the
how it
rectory's-
looked.
This is gone now, okay? And down over here is where the high school was, and that's where St. Alexander's is now. I took a picture of this 2 days ago, just before they started taking the windows out on this side. And I
Isn't-
got fairly close, but the church is in the way now, okay?
Isn't that amazing?
So Ron did teach me a little bit about taking then and now pictures. So now I'm going to back out of here, and I'm going to go to show you the pictures of the school, because Leo, I believe, had these, but I got them from Doris and Ray Turbide.
Oh, yes.
They are nice people.
Wonderful people.
Yeah, and
Oh, look at that. Isn't that neat?
this is
There it is.
1874. This is the Morrisonville High School. That's
I love
the
it.
oldest picture I have of it. Okay.
Isn't that beautiful? And there are descendants of some of those people who are
Oh,
watching this program right now, I'm sure.
They're old. 1874.
Yeah.
This is in 1904 was the high school redone, and then these check the dress on those.
Oh, I
folks.
love it. Aren't they beautiful?
That's back when little boys wore dresses too.
Isn't
you know
that beautiful?
This was the addition put onto the
Yes.
school, okay? So, I had a lady call me. This is an anecdote, and we were fortunate to be able to get this together. Said my husband has cancer, brain cancer, tumor, and he's having a birthday coming up, but he saw the old the blue book on for the parade for the 150th, and she said he'd love to have a picture of the old Morrisonville High School. Well, I didn't have any here. The pictures were not here, other than what was in the book. So I tried to get pictures, and I went around and talked to Cheese Rock, who's been a blessing
Oh, yes.
for giving me information.
Sure.
Cheese said, let me check. So he gets a hold of the turbides, and they send me down these. And I said, I'll pay you for them. And she said, no, they're yours. So I give them to the lady, and I talked to Shirley Balco, and she gave me some other certificates from the school and stuff like this. So I put it all together in a package, took it up to the lady, lives up in West Shazy. She says, how much do I owe you? You don't owe me anything. This is a gift from the town. She says, will you take a hug? I said, always take a hug.
I love it.
So I got a hug. She's happy. She sent us he was just beside himself. And he still has problems, and it's a slow process for him. But they sent me a wonderful thank you note, and I was just so happy. To
Isn't
be
it
able to do
gratifying
that.
to be able to do things like that when you have the resources, because people just don't on their own, so that's pretty neat.
Now, what I'm going to do here is back into this, and we're going to get our. That's a lady by the name of Pierce. She was the principal at the school. Cheese and I are going to go down and
That
talk.
might have been Fred Pierce's A relative of Fred Pierce,
I don't
no?
think so.
Don't think they were related?
They weren't related. Cheese and I are going down to talk to Mrs. Lewis, okay? Now, my slideshow's going again. This is just
Oh,
of the
look
high
at the
school.
names. See, you look at the
Yeah.
names, Rock, R-O-C-Q-U-E.
Oh, well,
Ooh.
en français.
Brett, St. Germain's, Conroy's, Trost.
That's
Names-
cheese right there in the middle.
Isn't he?
He
There's
said
a-
he said he was in love with every girl in the class.
I love it.
Yeah. So that's a side view of the old school. But Mrs. Lewis, who is the second oldest person in the town right now,
Really?
She knows of this Miss Pierce, and because her sister, I believe, had her in school. So we're going to. Cheese and I are going down to see her one day and get that information. These are priceless. I've
Yes.
got pictures of my grandparents and my great grandfather, who used to be the commissioner of highways in town of Plattsburgh,
No
1877, 78. Yeah,
Wow.
wearing socks on his hands for for gloves.
Oh, my
You know?
goodness. Look at the old
Yeah.
baseball team,
Yeah.
Morrisonville baseball teams.
Yeah.
Boy, have I heard a lot about those teams.
Yeah.
And the basketball teams. And
No.
I know so many of those people in that picture.
Yeah. No, Cheese brought in a copy of the old yearbook, 1931 or something like that. So that gave me about six classes, which was really.
Oh, yes, I know many of those people, and I've heard the stories about the old cars
Yeah.
they had to pile
That was
into.
Leo.
Oh, of
the
course.
last one, yeah.
Leo Perry. How they had to travel to Ellenburg
Oh,
and
yeah.
Moores
Oh,
and
yeah.
wherever they played, some old car. Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. And some of
Anyway.
my wife's ancestors are involved in those pictures.
Right.
And
They have to.
that's great that you're able to preserve those photographs that way. It's just,
This will run them all now.
that's pretty neat. You
No,
can
this
slip
is-
on over here and,
Yeah,
and sit
okay.
next to me before my arm gets tired. And we gotta end this in about 5 minutes because we got places to go and things to do.
Yes.
But you're just barely getting started
Oh.
in what you would like to accomplish.
Tip
in
of the
this town.
iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. There's so much, and the thing is, it is so open-ended. I can think of 100 different ways to go. The main thing is getting the documentation, getting it on the computer. I want to take that history, all of it, and put it into the Clinton County General webpage as well.
That's wonderful.
I started putting the cemeteries on because I don't believe anybody should have to pay to find out who his ancestors were.
I agree with you.
And we have too many people doing the work for the money. And that's my own personal opinion, and not always shared by the management.
And it's hard work.
Yeah, it is.
And
And
so
I
some
understand.
people who are professionals at that and earn their living at it, more power to them. But you're right, the resources should be available to the average citizen.
Oh, yeah, because history and family first, is too important to have to go at it with a checkbook. And that's my own personal philosophy, and I'm not going to foist it on anybody, but I will do whatever I can to make things available for people.
Well, you've worked with genealogy for a long time, and it's talk about a daunting task for the average person where nobody in their family has ever tried to preserve that history. That can be frightening.
Yeah.
And you get online and they try to sell you every kind of program in the world,
know.
and you reach dead ends. But for our viewers who want to check into their genealogy, be prepared to do some legwork, some
Oh.
letter writing, some
I'll tell you,
international travel. So,
I had a lady come in here and knew that we had some stuff and all, she's starting to ask me questions. Well, she brings in this big briefcase and she's pulling papers out, right? What about this and that? And I said, "Oh, time out. Have you gone here? Have you gone here? Have you gone here?" She says, "No, it takes too long to do that." I said, "We are not in a position. We don't have the time or the resources to do your legwork for you. If we have the information, we'll gladly give it to you, but you've got to do your research." And she was not want to do that. She wants somebody else to do that legwork. Well, those are the folks that should be paying But if I'm going to do my own legwork, it's a lot of work. But I shouldn't be doing somebody else's legwork either.
But there are still other resources. There are local historical societies. There are people who are glad to at least point you in the right direction.
SUNY, the library at SUNY. I've not been there myself, but I've heard that that is the place to go because they'll help you find anything.
It's
And
amazing.
It's a big resource there and very helpful. And I will get there. I have also used the Diversity Center at SUNY. The picnic in 1926. A lot of blackface, which in this day and age is totally wrong.
Well,
okay.
Of course.
And I called Michael Wiley and I said, "What do you think? What should I do?" And he said, "My first thought was don't publish." But then he said, "Wait a minute. That it did occur. There are photographs. It's history. It's just how you couch it when you write it." And we've come to an accommodation with that, and it's going to be in the history. So we're not going to keep anything out if we can get it in. So.
Well, that's good that you made that connection, though.
Oh, yeah. And I told him, I said, if you wouldn't have had the controversy with Judson, I would never have made the connection or called you. He said, well, some good came out of that.
Before we wrap it up, Marv, let's talk about some significant things that you would like to achieve, let's say, over the next few years. First of all, the cemetery, major milestone.
Oh, yeah.
Dedication will happen in September on the, 23rd?
23rd, 2 in the afternoon. It's going to be at 22 Norrisville Road. We even have a 911 number for
That's
it.
absolutely
And
true.
behind Rock's store, if
Yeah.
you know where the mall is, down in Schuyler Falls. And
I love it. But other
you'll
things,
see
what
it.
would you like to see in the future? What would you?
Well-
you've already touched on a lot of things you'd like to accomplish.
I want to get it here. I want to get it on the Clinton County General web page, the history. I want to get the history published in workbook form so it can be updated. I'd like to find out where the schools are, all of them. I'd like to do just a
You and
piece
me
on that.
too. This is a favorite
And,
thing for me.
And I've got 6 of them now. Need more work, but I know where 6 were. I got 4 to find. There's one up was on Shingle Street, and I'm going to go after that one next. There's just I need cataloging, and I just have so much. This is an old hanging map that the Broadwell family gave us.
No kidding.
Needs restoration. I don't dare take it out of the plastic
Wow.
because I don't want to open it up. It is so old. Joe Schuyler from Cadyville, who
Yes,
is into
I
that.
know very well.
Joe's going to come down, and he's going to get me on the right track with
You
that.
find out how to conserve it.
I love research, and I don't particularly care too much for the title historian, but I like research, or rather be called a researcher. My problem is that I don't always know what all the tools are that are available. So I am going to the Joe Schwinners of historical archives and things like that, and that's the kind of help. If there was somebody who was professional that knew what, I got enough chutzpah and drive to be able to get along. Because I don't want the credit. The people that do things and give things need the credit, and the people who lived here for all their entire lives. So those things. I have an old doctor's day book. I don't even dare open a page of it. It's so old, back from the mid 1800s. And Ezra Turner was in there, and
Of course.
he had certain problems, and he was treated. All of that was given by the Seymour family in honor of their parents. But I want to be able to display those things. I'd like to have a room, and I've been talking to the town board, and they've been looking at doing something. So it's a matter of time, patience.
Maybe when they see this program, that'll.
Well, and the problem with
Don't
the
call
patience,
Carol Netto.
problem with the patience, I don't have a lot of patience, and I try to do too many things. I had to put a lot of things on hold to get the cemetery thing done because it took a lot of
Well,
administrative stuff.
that was a priority and
Oh,
still
yeah.
is.
Oh yeah,
Obviously.
Oh yeah, and we'll be about 60% done, as I told you before, and still get Frank Agnew and his boys down. They
From the probation department,
they
Frank's
do
such a
job.
super guy.
Yeah, they have really, really helped. They put us over the. George and his crew told me they really couldn't have handled that whole thing. It just was too much for them.
Yeah. But I hope that in the course of this brief program that we have excited people to the pure joy of studying history. Do as I do and walk around your community and look at every house. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine what a family was like in that house in 1907, in 1868, whatever it might be. Every time I go past some old ruins, and I've spent a lot of time spelunking through the woods with my kids growing up, trying to imagine what one of these ghost towns looked like in its prime, you know?
Oh, we have my great grandfather's old day book when he was the commissioner of highways over and going out to work in the Katyville Bridge. Well, that wasn't just you drive out there and go. That was get a team and a work crew, and you rode out there. You worked. That's when your day started, when you got there, and that was when your time started. Your day started about 4 or 5 hours earlier.
Oh, sure.
You work 10, 12 hours, and you come home. Well, that's coming back with the team, and I mean, that's just imagine what they had to go through. They had to carry or make their own materials. 1870, not a lot of fast-moving resources that are going to move bulk material for you. So.
Well, Marv, I have the feeling that with your interest and great passion for history, that people will respond to this program. And if they do, I hope they contact you and just stop in sometime at the Morrisonville Town Hall, Town of Schuyler Falls Town Hall on Mason Street in Morrisonville. Call you on the telephone and say, hey, I got a scrapbook that I think you might be interested in. Oh, Marv, I got 500 old photographs. I don't know who these people are, but it looks like it. We're fortunate, as many towns are, where Calvin lives up in the northern tier, the same. Many of the old buildings survive. Many of the old places survive. And so if each person would take it upon themselves to check the history of their house, just so their kids would know that there were other generations of folks that lived there, several generations before them, I think we'd have a start.
And if you want to bring down somebody's old whalebone corset, we'll take that also. Okay. No, we hope to have some display coming up here pretty soon, and I'm excited about this. And people have been very good, and we've had people call us from Indiana, Oregon, lady up in Vermontville. Her 2 uncles worked on this bridge up here on the river, and I said, I'll take it. She's going to send a little blurb and what have you.
People fan out, but they're always interested in their roots. I mean, and people are friendly in these North Country towns, very friendly. My son visited from St. Paul, Minnesota area a few weeks ago, and they went for a morning walk. And these are the haunts that he grew up in. And he's walking on one of the back streets here over on Maple Street. Some lady working in her garden said, hey, and they stopped. How'd you like some squash?
Yeah.
They came home with armfuls of squash, and they were just so pleased because those are memories when people would talk to people. Now in a big city, you may not want to holler out to somebody, hey, how would you like some squash?
My wife tells me, you say hello to too many people. And I said, well, that's my ilk.
It's who I am and what I do, and it's never gotten me in too much trouble.
Well, I take and I always pull out and give them a card, and just for advertisement, because it's getting the word out, because we had a lot of calls, and I just wish we could have done more this summer with a lot of this stuff, but the cemetery right now, we'll get that out of the way, and
it'll happen.
Yeah,
and you'll get some volunteer help and committees and get things done. Marv Connor, thanks so much for being a good friend, but thanks especially for what you're trying to do to preserve the history in the town of Schuyler Falls.
You're welcome.
People like you are my heroes.
Thanks for coming down. I really appreciate this. And
maybe
thanks for the
once you get established and people bring in those boxes and boxes of new stuff, who knows, maybe there'll be another chapter to this story too.
Oh, I really appreciate you guys coming down, and thanks for the compliments. I just hope we can keep on and have success with this. It's going in the right direction, I think.
That's the name of the game.
Yep.
Keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.
Our scene shifts now to September 23rd, and we're at the site of the cemetery. And we're here with the dignitaries, media, and members of the public.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. God of all consolation, by your just decrees, our bodies return to the dust from which they were shaped. Yet in your way of mercy, you have turned this condition of darkness and death into a proof of your loving care. In your providence, you assured Abraham a burial place in the land of promise. You praised your servant Tobit for his charity in burying the dead. You will that your son be laid to rest in a new tomb, so that he might rise from it, the victor over death, and offer to us the pledge of our own resurrection. Grant that this cemetery may, by the power of your blessing, continue to be a place of rest and hope. May the bodies buried here always sleep in your peace, to rise immortal at the second coming of your Son. May this place be a comfort to the living, a sign of their hope for unending life. May prayers be offered here in supplication for those who sleep in Christ, and in constant praise of your mercy. And we ask all this in the name of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Father George. I would like to thank you all for coming. This has been a nice chore. There's a couple of people I need to recognize. Frank Agnew, you just raised your hand. He's from the probation. They did a lot of the work. Harold, or not Harold, George Seymour, Superintendent of Highways. I said, George, what can we do? He says, let me take a look, okay? And a lot of it come about because of George, because and his crew. This is his crew, part of them. Only back there. I've never, since I've been around, seen so many people working together so nicely. And the probation people, I have to tell you, I just don't know why those kids are on probation unless they're just kids being kids and got caught, okay? They've been super. I have the rare privilege of being kind of the con on this thing, but it's also allowed me to meet a lot of people. As you can see, I'm meeting people in the town for the first time today. Bob and his wife I see in church on Sunday, and they never knew who the hell they were. But I now have the privilege of that's on speed limit. We're going to have to raise it. I now have the privilege of introducing my supervisor, who was a big shot in the arm, and said, go for it. And that's Harold Olmsted.
Welcome, everybody. I'm just glad to be part of the town board that made this back possible. And I'm going to say no more and introduce Addie Shields. She's going to do the talking.
We will, when you're finished. We will do that, okay?
Well, the Lord is with us today because there's no more rain. And as I came here, I was just amazed what a stand of locusts this is. And you know the locust tree, the English brought these, and of course the Hilliards were English. And it was a status symbol. And all the old stone houses and all the old original houses, you look around as you go and see David Blaine houses with the locusts and so forth. And then I wondered, you know, as a farmer's wife, and I never lose my background as a farmer's wife, how come they use this piece of land? And then immediately I saw their efficiency, because the farmer used his working land to produce. Because when these people came here, they had to produce. There were no stores. They had their own self-reliance. And so why did they bury here? Sand Hill? And I believe it looked to them, I just saw this. I've never been here before. I believe they saw this as a place, a restful place, and also where the trees would grow, and where these people could slip into eternity just in peace and quiet. But then I wondered, because you know, as we go around the towns, you see their athletic places, and you see the places where they have to chain down a bench and so forth, and all of our people who are trying to get exercise and so forth. What a nice place in the evening to come, and the birds and so forth. This is a great cemetery. 200 years of our heritage is here. I couldn't help but wonder, you know, when they came, you know, we've had our centennial, and at the time of the centennial, we had the Franklin Institute, which was, a group of people who truly were history buffs, and they put together, and their first marker was out there at Culvert Hill, and H.K. Averill was one of those individuals. H.K. Averill knew the county like the back of his hand. He surveyed all of it, but it was a time of quickening, a time of recollecting, and a time of, you know, all people had to stop and pray. Now, you know, it was raining, and we wondered about that, but just think of the times when these people were here, when they might have had a piece of hay down, and they followed, or they got too much rain and couldn't get your corn off. So that always farmers have been in reverence. And these people were this was their jewel. And how can we make this a jewel and a gem to continue in Stonewall Falls? It's one out. And what would the forestry people up in Paul Smith's Street have? Couldn't help but think that with the centennial and with all of the quickening and our people appreciating their heritage, this is a part of their heritage. All of at that time, they started thinking about their veterans from the American Revolution. And you know, all of those veterans pretty much died off about 1835. And then we had the Civil War and so forth. And so at the turn of the century, 1900, they were marking, they were hunting up and finding out where these graves were. So that back in 1924, and I think that's the date on this, Jane Winship, who was regent of the DAR, that was a part of what she had to do, or what she tried to do, because it was a mission. She came up here and she copied all of this. And I just went last night and found those papers, and I got them to him. And what a wonderful, but I think it was a worry to her, because I think this cemetery has been a worry for a long time. And it was something that you couldn't do anything about, and I can see why. You know, the cemetery is supposed to be flat. You don't get in there with a lawnmower and you can mow them, but all right. And then in this town you had the Johnsons, wonderful people, Flora Johnson Mayette, and that Atkinson gal, her brother, Art Johnson, came up here in '74, and he copied it too. And at that time he found that there was a gal by the name of Mary Lou Gobel, G-O-B-E-L, and he remarked, one of the last things that he did in his little letter, in his story of this Hilliard Cemetery, he remarked how that she tried to keep the stevedores and so forth, and the people out of here, and that she came in here and picked up the branches and did what she could. Now that's '74. Now somewhere in the 40s, McClellan copied it too, because McClellan did all his work between 1933 and '66. But then we have this wonderful man who took the challenge, the bit in his mouth, and did this. You know, I couldn't help but think what a wonderful patriot he is, because these are real people, just like you and I, who lost their lives, you know. They wanted to live just as we did. And you think of the tears as people stepped out of here from Bavaria with their losses, and they had to pick up their lives and go on. We owe him a great debt of gratitude, a real debt of gratitude. In the meantime, I tried to think about, so what were these, can I lean? What were these people really doing when they came here? Because you know, in your history, It tells how that Ezra Turner came. He came 1794, he and his Amy Beeman, and they went 7 miles inland from the little settlement of Plattsburgh along Lake Champlain. They went 7 miles inland and built a log cabin in the woods. And then in 1798, this Daniel Hilliard came here. And remember, he was an American Revolutionary soldier, but he had 6 children born over in Vermont. And I thought, how did he ever manage to move here? What did he have to do with? Because at that time, if you look at all the old wills and so forth, the people that were dying at that time maybe had a yoke of oxen. If they were rich, they had a saddle horse. Maybe they had 3 sheep and 2 cows and a pig. How'd they move all that? And especially with 6 children. But I could see something. Most of the American Revolutionary soldiers that came about 1800 had a stalwart son. There were baby boomers that were born at the time of the Revolution, and these were the boys that could help them. So when Daniel Hilliard came here, he had Obed and he had Hiram. Obed was 14 and Hiram was 11. And then his oldest girl, Fanny, you just think as they moved here, how'd they do that? How programmed they must have been. How daring they must have been to come up here and take the risks, because those are the Adirondacks over there. And the wolves come down from the Adirondacks, and unless you protect your animals, they've bit your sheep, you know, and then you have to kill them because there was no way. Yes, they made a salve that was alum and spruce and pine, cooked it up, heated it up, and that's all they had, or a bear claws on the rump of a horse or a oxen. How do you get that better? What a lot of courage they had. And anybody who came here at the turn of the century had to bring about 2 years' clothing because there was no place to buy anything. And they did not have polyester and leather shoes as we do. They probably had leather, and think how fortunate they were if a deer meandered in, you know, and they were able to have that deer with something to the table, because that woman, Rebecca Washburn, as I figured it out, had 10 people at the table all the time. 10 people. And she had 11 children in all. And he showed me the little, the place where the cottage was and so forth, that log cabin. And you think of all of the things that we think you have to have, that these people got along without. These were wonderful people. And they deserve what this man has done. And I think nature has done something for them, these wonderful locusts. I'm not sure how many you can save. And I can see, too, this was sand, this was easy digging, and it was a place where they couldn't raise the crop. And I think that's why this was here. It's your heritage. You think of all the people who left, who went out of here in tears. It's your heritage for reverence and for our children. We just steal a golden moment. We have a lot of people to thank. I think we could all join together and say, Father, we thank you. The other thing I didn't bring out was, you know, so many people like Jane Winship, then Arthur Johnson, who lived here, and then think of McClellan copying 153 cemeteries in Clinton County between the years of 1933 and 66. What a wonderful record that was. And he did it because, you know, when these people buried somebody, you know, and that's 6 foot down, and you got to shovel all that back and so forth. And, you know, most generally the fellow went and ate his porridge, and nobody kept a record of everything. And this man has done, and here you have a record. And I hope the reverence will continue.
Before we do this, you're all invited down to the town for a little cake, cookies, or whatever. And don't disappoint my wife, who is not going to do it. I think we can just bring it down.
This man got the money to do this here. Otherwise, it will tell you, Bob Bruno will tell you, it's difficult to find money to do certain things. Right?
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this, because this has been 2 years, George? We've been working on it for 2 years. we have at least 2 years more work. We still have raking to do, and we're going to take the headstones and set them up and put some rebar in so we can have that. And we've got Rick down at Plattsburgh Memorial has given us little packages of epoxy to be so we can put some of the stones together and whatever. We can never get them all back. But, this is all that we have. And there are about, if you want to walk up, there are about 24 headstones with pieces of stones around. And you can see they're lying where they were lying when we came in. There's one way up on the top. There's 5 pieces. George and I found that one day. I think Frank, you people brought them up, didn't you?
Yeah.
In the sand pit. 10 inches of granite. So we have to really hammer it. Anyway.
Excuse me, Marvin, I was mentioning Bob Burrow, but he was supervisor in the early 80s. He did some work in here just at that time, put the steel fence up around the garden. Ray Newell got in touch with the Hillers, but the Hillers got in touch with Ray, and then that's how we got to where we are today.
So where is she? That's the lady that took a big chunk out of her. And she's and I really think
The old names here, the Rands, the Purdy's, and you know, to a great extent they were quite somewhat related to each other, and the Roberts. Just absolutely wonderful people that are laid to rest up here. This is their heritage.
there are 50 graves accounted for here. And there are 7 unknowns and 1 unknown 1812 we were supposed to put the marker, the historical marker up, so hopefully people will kind of tend to keep it reverent.
Do you know what's inside the iron pipe?
I don't know, Bob, you're going to have to answer that.
Bob replaced iron pipe when he was
Yeah, I can tell you what's inside the iron pipe. All of this, Bruce Seymour got after me, this was in the late 60s. And Addie knows Bruce Seymour, who lived in town here, about the cemetery. So we came over with a group of summer houses, and we cleaned out the entire area, and the gentleman that organized and worked with the kids got the iron pipe, and we put all the stones inside the iron pipe. They were not in any graves anywhere. There were several. They've been carved it off. The ones that were up at the cemetery, so they were all really up there. And some of them were just 2-3 feet apart, but we had no idea where they originally were located.
That's one of the problems. We don't know the layout of the cemetery.
No, the cemetery was right in the back here, and that's where the stones were at that time, and that's before they some of the kids like Harold when he was young and so forth carted them around, but we gathered them all back up, and they put them all in that one area. And she was the one that was really responsible for
I think probably every kid that went
Carol
to Skull
Allen's Aunt Ruth.
school here had a little part in the cemetery.
the what?
Mrs. Ruth, the voice, Ruth
Royce
Seymour
Seymour.
was Ruth Craig. Carol's Aunt Ruth, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
She was a DAR man.
Yes, it was very strong. By the way, Addie, the building that's next door was the school.
Well, this man has got a lot more work to do, and,
The
and you can be
Hilders
so
lived
proud
on
of so much.
The building that's right around the corner, the second house that they're doing the work on now, is where the Hildreths lived. When my grandfather bought that building, the Hildreths right after World War I. I think they had a son that died there, so it was like the influenza. Okay.
No, I think that's fine, because you see, we need to record, because Bob Shore was the supervisor here before he was the legislator.
I lived here.
Of course. And John, doesn't John live here somewhere too?
It wasn't just I went to school and I 2-room schoolhouse to John Coffey's sister.
we invited, I made a special purpose of inviting all of the other supervisors because I know that through the years it's been up and down and trying to get things done and whatever. So
I'm glad you used that term, old.
Past, former, past, former. I have to include them with Harold, so I have to use one term fits all.
Well, some of us are younger than Harold.
Anyway, thank you very much. Refreshments down at the town hall. Does everybody know how to get to the town hall? Down on Mason Street. You guys. And if anybody wants more of the programs, I do have them down there. Okay? Thank you very much.
We're going to close off this look at the dedication of the Schuyler Falls Hilliard Cemetery. There are stones scattered throughout the hill. Here, some are lying flat. You have to walk up to them to spot them. And there are a few that are still standing, but I would say the majority are probably lying flat on the ground. And over 50 souls are buried here, apparently. This is off the Norrisville Road. This is actually just off the Norrisville Road. The traffic we heard was Norrisville Road traffic. And this will conclude our program. Thanks for watching, and for those of you supporting Hometown Cable's continuing efforts.